Good day to you, the general public. My name is Christopher Wilson. I'm studying in Trinidad, completing an undergraduate degree in business and history, and this is my final year. Today I will be looking at economic reform for Guyana. The reason why I construct this whole system is that since 1966 to now, Guyana has not have a structural system, both political and economic, also social. And I think that designing this economic reform would persuade leaders to take a stand in terms of formulating strong policies that would push Guyana forward. In economic reform, I would be looking at the devaluation of the currency exchange rate, revalue of currency exchange rate, reduction in the cost of living, and more stable jobs for young people. Basically, devaluation of the currency rate. It can best define whereby a country devalue its currency so that its export could become cheaper. But in a case with Guyana, the currency rate is at 200 Guyana dollar to 1 US, which is totally unacceptable, because when countries devalue the currency to that extent, it increases the cost of living. So for example, food prices would go up, everything would go up in the economy. So if you buy a bread, if you used to buy a bread for say $10, and since the currency rate has devalued, it could lead that you would pay for bread as $20. So your purchasing power within the consumers has been reduced. Looking at the currency exchange rate to the US dollar. For instance, before 1986, Guyana currency was 3 Guyana dollar to 1 US. And from 1986 down, 4.3 Guyana dollar to 1 US in comparison with Barbados 2 Guyana dollar. 1987, 9.8 to 1 US, comparison with Barbados $2. 1988, 10 Barbados 2. 1989, 27.20 Barbados 2. 1990, 39.50 Barbados 2. 1991, 111.08 Barbados 2. 1992, $125 Barbados 2. 1993, 126.7 Barbados 2. 1994, 138.30 Guyana dollar to 1 US, Barbados 2 Bajan dollar to 1 US. 1995, $142 and Barbados 2 to the US. 1996, 140.40 Barbados 2. 1997, 1998, 150.50 Barbados 2. So what we're looking at is that from 1986, that's after Barnum died and Desmond Knight took over, from 1986 to 1992, during the PNC reigning under Desmond Knight, the currency has devalued to the US dollar to a great extent. In addition to that, import was more than export. Import override export. So the economy eventually occurred hyperinflation. As a result of that, they had to borrow money from the IMF. And when borrowing money from the IMF, first thing, the IMF would dictate your economy in terms of how the economic structure should organize, because you have to pay back IMF what you have owed them. That basically called structural adjustment. In addition to that, the nation cannot really blame the IMF. For example, in most of the third world countries, that the IMF normally pressure third world countries, because the IMF is a financial institution like any other institution. As long as government borrowed money, they need to pay back. For example, if 10 countries borrowed money from the IMF and they do not pay back, how the IMF would accumulate as much funds for other developing countries? So what we have seen here is that what Desmonite has done is that he borrowed money from the IMF and he pumped it into the economy, but it did not pump for economic growth. For example, what he should have done is, if he borrowed, for example, 10 million US dollars from the IMF, he could have issued bonds to businesses and pay on premium, whereby businesses would pay back, and the rest he could inject it into the public sector, where it would create jobs and also revenue would return. But nothing like that has ever occurred. So as a result of that, that led to the devaluation of Guyana currency to a great extent, in contrast to other Caribbean islands, where basically the Caribbean, within St. Lucia, Barbados, etc., is 2.70 EC dollar to 1 US. Bajan $2 to 1 US, and Trinidad is 6.3 to 1 US. So the whole issue is that the economic structure and governance within Guyana has not been modified or upgraded, and as a result of that, that's why the economy has crashed. Well, some may say that even though the US dollars has power within Guyana, and when other people come to Guyana and they change, for example, the Bajan dollar, you change it into Guyana, things would be cheaper. But we need to understand that when it would be cheaper for tourists, because their money have power, so it would be cheaper for tourists. But what about the people who live in the economy, who cannot afford the basic standard of living, cannot afford the basic necessity? So basically, that would only help tourists. In addition to that, when businesses export the goods and services, and it's not on international price, standard price, what will happen is that when they convert the US into the Guyana dollar into US, is that we're not doing no business, because our thing would sell cheap, too cheap on the world market, and we would not have much US in our reserve. Also, we need to take into consideration that even though it was 3-1 in Burnham time, notwithstanding that, he tried as much to stabilize it, but eventually he got rid of a lot of foreign businesses out of Guyana, which I think is not right, because in any economy you must have both private and public sector working together, because creating socialism in the third world country, it would not work. For a country to go socialist, you must have 80% of the citizens vowing for that. Also the opposition must vow for that. And also the country must have wealth. Because remember, socialism is all about state planning and the state controlling the wealth of the country. And when the wealth deteriorated and the masses do not have as much wealth, they would protest. So how to revalue Guyana exchange currency rate? Well, basically, business have to be strong, have strong policies and structures in order to export as much so the currency could revalue. 1. Both public and private sector administrative system needs to upgrade. For example, new technologies, highly skilled personnel, and good working ethics. Because both the private and the public sector, what we have observed is that they don't have proper policies. And it's not just Guyana alone in terms of the public sector. Right to the Caribbean, the public sector are not effective and efficient. So much revenue would not come into the economy. So the public sector and the private sector need to upgrade. Also highly skilled personnel, because having a high increase in brain drain, that means that the economy would not go forward, because human resources is important in an economy. Also good working ethics. For example, traveling to the first world country, working ethics is important to maintain the standard within the developed countries. Good working ethics. So if Guyana or also the Caribbean need to go forward, working ethics is important. Upgrade all local products to international standard. And this is one of the issues affecting Guyana and also the Caribbean. If we need to be competitive on the world market, our product need to meet international standards and attractive to world market, or else it's like we're not going to do no business. Develop proper marketing strategies and carry out feasibility studies in key marketing area. For example, Latin America is a booming economy. So if Guyana target Latin America in trade, that would bring as much revenue instead of leaning on the metropolitan countries. Because for example, the Euro crisis, we don't know when it would finish. It could be in the next 5 years. Also, North America just come out of a recession and not fully. So they need to target Latin America countries. Government need to persuade private investors to seek outside market beyond CARICOM. So Latin America is an example. Also Asia, for example, India and China. Revalue exchange rate to minimum standard that would still maintain increase in export. So by following these strategies, if businesses work with these strategies and also government persuade them, that's the only way export would increase. And as export increase, that's where the money could revalue. Because in an economy that really keep an economy, it has to do with revenue. And revenue in terms of US dollars within the reserve. And pounds. That's what normally hold an economy. US currency, pounds and euro. Offer temporary tax breaks to foreign investors. So as the economy develops locally and more attractive, a foreign investor would come in. And as a result of that, by reducing taxes, that's where they would now come with their expertise so that the economy could kick further and could reduce the cost of living in the economy. For example, implement legislation dealing with minimum wage so that it is commensurable to the poorer class expenses. Jobs creation. This is where government need to persuade private investors to diversify their economy so that jobs could be created, and as a result of that, young people would stay within the country. Because if no job is not in the economy, they will have a high increase in human resources, brain drain. Reduction of the VAT system. Well, in Guyana basically, where people minimum wage is 50,000 a month and the expenses is actually 55 to 60,000. So implementing VAT system will not work, because what VAT is doing is decreasing the average person's standard of living, the masses. And also Guyana money do not have power out of the economy, and in the economy the purchasing power is weak. So what government need to do, instead of having the VAT system at 7%, I think so, what they need to do, reduce the VAT system and target illegal trade within Guyana. For example, the Corentyne River. Also, illegal pork knocking in the interior, where people dredge for gold and do not pay no tax. So basically they need to target people who are involved in illegal trade, for example black marketing. That's where they need to target, so that they could pay tax and restructure the whole system. Develop proper feasibility studies and marketing strategies in target areas to market government natural resources. So, for example, the gold. What government need to do with the gold, instead of just handing out contracts or bringing Canada into the economy, which is good, have your gold now put on the world market in reserve. Have your gold in reserve on the world market. Also, within the islands, it does not have much jewelry shop. So if government train marketing export or acquire marketing export, and you set up different jewelry shop within the Caribbean, it would bring as much revenue. For example, in Norway, government have businesses in other economies where they bring up with a lot of revenue returning to the economy. So they need to do that. Now, looking at the monthly minimum wage and salary, for example, what we have seen that, based on my research, is that the gross salary is $40,000. Tax is 10%, which is $4,000. And as you look at the expenses, what we have seen that the total expense is $42,000 and the net salary is $36,000. So basically people working below their net salary, the expense is more than the net salary. So they need to look at that and try to organize proper policies to reduce that high cost of living. What the poor classes should do to combat the system. Well, this is very important, and this is for the poor classes within Guyana. And the masses, and I'm talking the poorer classes, you need to come together, both Indian and Africans, to pressure the government. Why you need to come together is that since 1966 to now, it's two main parties in Guyana. The PPP Civic, the PNC. The PNC have run Guyana for 28 years, from 1964 to 1992. Now we have the PPPC from 1992 to now just concluding election and they won it, even though they did not win by a majority. So what I'm saying to you, the poorer classes in society, both of you need to come together and vote for a next party that do not have no affiliation with the two dominant party, and that's where changes will happen. And it's not just in Guyana but in the whole Caribbean. What I've observed is that since the Caribbean, different islands in the Caribbean gained independence, it's two main political parties and they're just changing name and moving from one party to the next, and the status quo remain. So in a democratic society, what both Indians and Africans need to do is vote for a party where none of the leaders have no affiliation with either the ruling or the opposition party, and changes would happen. Lobby for increase in pension and wages, or reduce the income taxes. So, for example, since the majorities of opposition having a lot of say within Parliament, you the people need to lobby by persuading your leader that they need to press for changes in the minimum wage, increasing minimum wage, also the reduction in the income taxes, because that's very important. The masses need to live within their monthly budget. So what I'm saying to you, the poor class, if you're working for probably $50,000, live within your budget. Because if you do not live within your budget, well then you would eventually find yourself in a catastrophic effect. So you need to live within your budget. Our next point, pay more emphasis on your children's education at all levels. And this is what you need to take into consideration. Even though you may not have a high school diploma or probably never get the opportunity due to economic circumstances, you need to whatever you work for, put it into your children's education, because they're the future of the country. And this is both African and Indian, in particular to the Africans. You need to be more interested in your children's education so that the reduction in poverty, especially among the African race, would make a positive effect within the economy. Reduce the increase in childbearing. Well, basically to you the masses, and this is the poorer class, you need to look at your population rate. Also, you need to look at your household. Because one of the major problems affecting the global hemisphere, in particular the third world country, is that there is a vast increase in the population growth. For example, 10 years back was actually 6.7 billion. Now the world has 7 billion and moving. And we do not have as much food to supply that masses. So women, you are the backbone within the world. And it's time you need to take serious consideration and try as much to elevate yourself more and reduce the increase in childbearing, because or you will eventually find yourself into deep poverty. Also, men, you need to take a stand and pay more attention to your children, because within the third world, also in the Caribbean, there's a vast increase in single parent, and it's very hard for women to working for a minimum wage and has to supply 7 to 8 children, and they're very young. So women, you are the sole bearer within the economy, and it's time you need to be more serious, be focused on your education, and upgrade yourself, and even pass on that ideology to your children. Well, to conclude, Guyana, both the opposition and the ruling party needs to come together and fix the economy. Also, they need to have the right advisors, because if they do not have the right advisor, the economy will have a lot of wealth and it would not go nowhere. For example, Nigeria, a country on West Africa continent. They have gas, oil, everything. And the average person in Nigeria living on $1 US a day. So what has happened within the third world countries is that the management system is poor and weak. And I would advise you is that leaders, the best advisor you could take is people who have studied within the Western country, who has studied Western economics and Western ideology. And the reason why I say that, because most of the policies that are being formulated within the Caribbean in particular Guyana, Trinidad, etc., are with Western leaders, and the policies that Caribbean leaders make are poor. So if they have Western people who have studied, probably say Harvard University or Oxford, and they were able to formulate strong policies that would bring as much a large increase in revenue within the economy. And looking at the slide here, this is basically Curitiba from Brazil, in Brazil. And what you have observed is that within Curitiba, the economic system is great. Also the environmental system, the strategies that the environmentalists are implementing is working for Curitiba in Brazil. And I think that politicians should not just have economists as their advisor, but also they should have environmentalists, psychologists. Those are the people, are the backbone for uplifting the economy. Because if we look at it, is that the amount of problems being occurred within the economy, it arises out of environmental problems, social problems, and economic problems. So both economic, social, and environmental is important within an economy. And this is all for now. And my next speech would be on political reform. And why I will do on political reform, you would see the whole catastrophic problem within the political system, both in Guyana and also I would touch within the Caribbean. Why? You see, two main parties have remained there from since 1962. The Caribbean gained independence from Jamaica come right down to now. And there is no way people to break that status quo. And you would see the reason why and the effects. And where your say could put now, and it could bring a change because it's a democratic society. My name is Christopher Wilson, and look forward for the next update soon as possible.